Are you going on your first time bike tour, or do you want to gain more knowledge on staying safe out on the road? In this video I'm going to discuss 10 of the most common worries people have and what you can do to stay safe. Staying safe is a key factor while traveling in general and important to talk about. Risk and danger are everywhere, but so are safety and kind people that are willing to help you out. Yes, traveling by bicycle makes you vulnerable. Your vulnerability on a bike also makes people want to watch out for you, and that can result in wonderful encounters. That said, life can be boring without a little bit of risk. I'm not saying you just throw yourself into dangerous situations, but it's easy to get caught up in all the what ifs, and it might prevent you from going in the first place. All the categories that I'm going to discuss are relative depending on which country you plan to cycle, your own comfort levels, common sense, good risk calculation, and also gut feeling and intuition. I've put timestamps in the description below so you can skip to the section that you want to learn more about. So the first stop is navigation. For some people, navigation can be daunting, especially when you're planning to go on a long tour in unfamiliar countries. You could have worries about getting lost or riding in the wrong direction, for example. So assuming you're not navigating with paper maps, digital technology nowadays makes it really difficult to get lost. The real danger lies in not understanding the programs you use, your equipment failing on you, losing GPS connection, unforeseen obstacles along the way, or not planning your route properly. The biggest issues we've encountered were typically in situations with severe weather conditions. For example, when it's very cold, the batteries of our smartphones can drain quickly, or in the bright sun, it's difficult to see your screen, which can make navigating slower. If you plan to cycle in remote areas with little resources, we recommend to study the map up front so you have an understanding of the terrain, elevation, and distance from town to town. Make sure to check the weather forecast, mark important places like supermarkets, water sources, small villages, or accommodation possibilities, for example. And for a sense of security, some people take an SOS device like a Garmin InReach or a Spot satellite. These are subscription-based GPS tracking devices with which you can send basic messages to friends and family, or an SOS signal with a message and your location to a search and rescue center. One of the most important aspects on every tour is your mindset. This goes hand in hand with common sense, knowing how to separate danger from the reality. When you feel stressed, take a moment to calm down and assess the situation. When you feel panicked, you're often unable to make rational and practical decisions, and it might only get you into more trouble. So to end on a high note, ask yourself, does it really matter where you're going, and do you need to be there in a certain time? If not, the main aspects you should think of are your basic needs like food, water, and shelter. It's important to understand the circumstances you're about to cycle in and adapt your schedule accordingly. And lastly, don't be afraid to ask for help, because most of the people will help you to find the right direction or a solution to your problem. Next up is bike repair and maintenance. When you're touring alone or even together, but especially in remote areas, you have to understand how to maintain and replace or fix parts on your bicycle. We recommend going to your local bike shop. Tell them about your expedition and ask if they want to teach you everything you need to know. Some bicycle stores even offer courses, which can give you a good foundation of knowledge. A really great way to learn more about the different parts on your bike and how they work is to build your bicycle from the ground up. Or if you already have a bicycle, get it apart and build it back up. Eric made the dedicated decision to build up his own bike, which gave him the skills and confidence to solve problems out on the road. You can also find a wealth of information on the internet. YouTube in particular is a great platform to look up tutorial videos and follow along step by step. Even when you're on the road, you could look up information online on how to fix a problem. And without internet connection, you can download videos and maintenance guides up front. There are some great resources we can recommend, which I'll link down below. Eric also made a video about the tools we take on our bike tour, so if you like to check it out, I'll link it up here. So next up is the social and political climate of a country. Socially and politically, different countries have different issues on all kinds of levels, some more dangerous than others. It can also occur that particular parts of a country are perfectly safe while others are not. There's usually a lot of information on governmental websites on the most common issues of a country and travel safety in general. We travel to countries with a variety of safety warnings, and Based on the information we read, we carefully think about the risks and make an educated decision whether or not to travel there. Over time, we gain more experience about what information we should take very seriously and what other informations we are less concerned about. During our world tour, we were in contact with people through Facebook and WhatsApp to get more accurate updates or even personal opinions on the safety situation in a country or certain areas of a country. After taking everything into careful consideration, we could pursue our travels or we might decide to change our plans. A recurring theme we notice from time to time is local people talking negatively about their neighbor countries, often accompanied by uncomfortable body language and gestures, making us scared to go there. After some time on the road, we came to learn that more often than not, these opinions were not based on personal experiences. Until now, in every of those circumstances, the opposite was true, and over time we learned to distinguish the serious warnings from the just making conversation type of talks. And my last tip, one rule we have on our adventure is that depending on the country, we never initiate a discussion about religion, politics or other sensitive topics. Only if people themselves start a conversation about it, we might ask some questions without giving our personal opinion. One of the reasons we don't decide to engage in these types of conversations is because we use translation apps, which don't always translate accurately. So things can literally get lost in translation, and that way it's difficult to have a nuanced conversation about subjects as sensitive as these. So the next stop is traffic. The best advice I've ever got is to ride defensively. Take your time, don't rush anything. I really lived by that advice and assumed that if I ride safely and predictable, the chances of an accident happening reduces significantly. In the Netherlands that means riding on bicycle lanes and using the traffic lights, but in Asia, for example, that means going with the flow and weave yourself through all the motors and tuk-tuks. My advice is to not get sloppy with safety gear. We fall into this trap from time to time, so this is kind of a note to self. Use lights, a safety vest and a helmet. You can avoid a lot of traffic by planning out your route. That way you don't get stuck in a situation where the only way out is to turn back or to take a busy road without a shoulder. Because many a times you don't feel like turning around, so you might compromise and choose to put yourself in a less than ideal situation. So scrutinize the maps or make use of some tools like Google Maps. You can look at satellite images or drop a pin to get an idea of what type of road to expect. We also use a mirror, a great way to keep track with everything that's coming from behind. And my last tip when traveling with a partner is to be respectful of each other's limits. And don't force anyone to do something they really don't feel comfortable with. It might make someone feel more stressed out, and that way it can lead to mistakes. The next up is people with bad intentions. Meeting people from all parts of the world and learning about their way of living is, in our opinion, the best aspect of bicycle touring. We don't want to sugarcoat anything, but the bad experiences stand into no comparison to everything that went well and how we've been welcomed and taken care of. During our time on the road, we've experienced just a few incidents that were uncomfortable, of which one very serious that concerned assault, on which I've made a separate video about. To put things into perspective, all these incidents happened over a large time span and were very few and far in between. Unfortunately, there's a small percentage of people with bad intentions because of a certain upbringing or poor living conditions, for example. You can encounter the wrong people absolutely anywhere, not only on a bike tour, but just as well in your normal day-to-day life. Again, depending on the country, there are a few things that can help. First up, try to avoid cycling or walking around after the sun goes down. Next up, have some basic understanding of the cultural values and behavior norms of a country. Dress according to the local norms. This counts for men, but especially women. When you blend in, you draw less attention. Next, try to read someone's look. If you're a good judge of character, you can often tell if someone's up to something by looking into their eyes. Don't hesitate to leave the situation if you're not sure about someone's intentions. Next up is maybe obvious, but don't get intoxicated or indulge in any substances if you're not 100% sure about the situation. Next is taking some self-defense classes. I've been training for a few months now and I've learned a lot of skills, and beside that it gives me a healthy dose of confidence. Next up is camp out of sight and make sure no one notices you. In my video about stealth camping, I go into detail and share countless tips on how to stay safe when camping. Check it out here. If you're riding in a country that is known for certain serious problems like corruption, trafficking, or even terroristic activities. First of all, don't take any risk. Even if it feels normal and safe, it doesn't have to be true. Try to inform yourself by talking to the locals, because they are often up to date with current events and know where to go and where to stay away from. Hunting is common in many countries, and if you're not used to it, it could give you quite a scare. In countries where it's regulated, there are specific seasons that people are allowed to hunt, which you can look up online. But in places with less regulation, it's hard to know when or where it happens. You can look at the ground for evidence of hunting or ask the local people about it. So the last is, I do think that women traveling alone are more vulnerable. In addition to the tips that I shared earlier, like learning self-defense skills, avoiding intoxication and dressing to the local norm, my advice is to avoid too much eye contact, avoid accepting rides, and share your travel plans with someone. So next up is keeping your valuables safe. To start off, knock on wood, we've never had any issues with items being stolen. Of course, the most important things to keep safe is your passport, other important documents, and some money. You might even choose to wear it on your body. You can also make use of multiple wallets, for example. One for daily use that has some cash in it, and another with your remaining money and bank cards that you store somewhere else. I always make sure to back up my important files, like photos and videos, as soon and often as I can. So in the case that my phone or camera gets stolen, I still carry my files on my hard disk. And if you're in an unfortunate situation and you threaten to give up your valuable items, don't hesitate, because material items can be replaced and you don't want the situation to escalate even more. And of course, your bicycle. Depending on which country you're in, your bicycle could be of quite some value to people. Because we are with the two of us, one person always stays with the bikes and the gear, while the other arranges a hotel or runs some errands, for example. If you're alone, we recommend taking a sturdy lock and taking at least your most important items with you. On stealth camping locations, I almost never lock my bike. We mainly camp in very well hidden places and if possible far away from people. If you are camping somewhere with more people around, I do recommend to lock your bike. You can even attach it to your tent to discourage people from taking it. And a last tip is maybe obvious, but it's good to mention anyway. There are some places where you're asking for trouble by being flashy with your expensive gear. In some countries, your camera might be the equivalent of someone's salary for a month. It's just important to keep that in mind. The next up is wild camping and trespassing. I've made an extended and dedicated video on stealth camping, where I also touch on trespassing. I share lots of safety tips and tricks, so if you want to check it out, I will link it up here. Next up is the elements. Weather might be one of the aspects of bike traveling that can pose the most risk if you're not prepared. We always try to stay up to date with the weather forecast. When we feel unsafe or are caught in severe weather, we usually try to seek shelter, also if that means putting up the tent or booking accommodation for the night. The best way to prepare yourself is to have proper equipment, but also to understand your own capabilities and comfort levels. Apart from the season and climate of the country, ask yourself if there are specific things that should be taken into account, like hurricanes, sandstorms, monsoons, or drought, for example. By informing yourself, you can take steps to prepare for these different circumstances. A heat stroke or burnt skin are serious issues and something to watch out for. With constant sun, it's important to stay hydrated without overdoing it, and perhaps add some electrolytes to your water to restore essential minerals. You can protect yourself by using sunscreen, but we personally like to cover up our bodies. UV poisoning and dehydration of the lips can also occur, for which we use lip balm with UV protection. Next up is rain and thunder. Rain itself is relatively easy to manage with the right rain gear, but it can also affect other things like rising water levels, roads that become muddy and slippery, reduced visibility on the road, or finding dry camp spots, for example. All of these aspects can slow you down significantly, and that's important to take into account. In the mountains, weather can change really quickly and unexpectedly, and the weather forecast is usually pretty unreliable. Learning some basic weather patterns can help you to predict what's coming. If you're caught in a thunderstorm, we always try to seek shelter somewhere in sight, but if not possible, avoid open fields, hills, or isolated tall objects, and stay away from bodies of water and metal objects which can act as a conductor for electricity. The next step is cold. Cold can make or break a trip, but your mindset plays a big role. We noticed that over time we became mentally more resilient and it doesn't affect us as much as it used to. One way of training your mindset is by exposing yourself to cold more often. Cold showers is a very comfortable and great way to do that. To minimize the risk of getting cold during the day is to eat enough food, drink warm beverages, and if possible take rest stops to warm up. A good clothing layering system can help to regulate temperature. For the torso, ideally you want a base layer, mid layer, warmth layer, possibly a wind layer and a rain jacket. It gives you a lot of flexibility to regulate your body temperature. Make sure to protect your extremities. Cover up your head and neck area, use insulated waterproof gloves combined with pogies for example, and choose the right pair of shoes that aren't too tight, because this can cut off blood circulation. Another reason why people often get cold is because of sweat. This isn't a problem when you're on the move, but when you stop for a moment, your instant reaction can be to take something off, but that way you cool down quickly. Playing around with your different layers can prevent the buildup of too much sweat. Choosing the right tent is a great way to start. Look up the benefits of both 3 and 4 season tents and choose what best fits you. Around camp you don't move as much, so putting on extra layers immediately after you stop helps you to stay warm. Before you go to sleep, there are a few things you can do to make sure you set yourself up for a warm night. First up is to make camp and get your sleeping bag out of its compression sack to give it time to loft up. Other ideas are to do some exercises to get the blood flowing, or having a calorie-dense snack can also help to have enough energy to burn. I would advise to avoid drinking alcohol because it might make you feel warm for a while, but what actually happens is that your blood transfers to the surface of the skin and gets away from your core. And lastly, you could make a hot water bottle to start off the night warm. Something often overlooked and underestimated is how much heat you lose to the ground. This can be solved by using an airmat with a high R value rating. You can even top it up by combining it with a thin foam pad or a bivy bag. As for clothing, I personally like to use thermal underwear, but there are arguments to be made about wearing as little as possible. I've personally never felt the benefits. To keep you warm, make sure your extremities are cozy and comfy. A beanie and some down insulated booties help a ton to stay a bit warmer at night. And lastly, try to make sure your sleeping equipment is dry, doesn't have any cold spots, and avoid breathing into the sleeping bag to prevent moisture buildup, which can condense and make your bag feel cold and damp. Ideally you want to avoid too much dead space in your sleeping bag because smaller spaces warm up faster and retain heat more efficiently. Try to avoid the buildup of condensation in the tent by ventilating properly. If it's really cold and you're cycling together, you can also make use of each other's body heat. Cycling in extreme winter conditions is something we haven't done yet and is a whole different cookie. For that we like to refer you to the videos of Nomads Trails about their winter cycling and equipment tips for their Arctic tour in Scandinavia. I will link it down in the description. Next up is animals. From the Brazilian rainforest to the African bush and from the Canadian taiga to the Australian outback, the type of wildlife in a country can vary wildly. In reality, most animals will try to avoid you. We are not experts at all on how to deal with most animals. Our advice is to inform yourself on which animals you can expect in the area you plan to cycle and talk to local people or other travelers to get a better understanding on how to behave and act in areas with wildlife. There are a few animals that were recurring in every country and of main concern during our trip. To keep it compact, I will only cover these. So the first and maybe the main issue were dogs. We've mainly had trouble with 3 types of dogs. Guard dogs, which are mostly on a leash, so you don't really have to worry about them. Stray dogs, which are often too afraid, so they don't bother you. And sheep dogs, which want to guard their property and were the ones we had the most trouble with. There are several ways to guard them off. Dogs are triggered by movement, so most dogs calm down when you stop cycling. If they keep barking or attacking, you can place your bicycles between you and the dog and shout or pretend to throw something. We've heard of people utilizing different tools and devices to defend themselves, but we never felt the necessity to use that. A lot of the time a bit of shouting already helps to back them off, and many of them are actually quite cute. The next up is bears. We are no experts at all on this matter, but there are a few basic things we can discuss. Bears are omnivores and opportunists, and humans are typically not on a bear's menu. Maybe on the polar bear's menu, but I assume you don't plan on riding on the North Pole anytime soon. Bears generally try to avoid human contact. If you do encounter a bear, there are a few situations where a bear is more likely to charge or make a bluff charge. A bear could be sick and therefore behave differently, or a bear could be starving because of the lack of available food. This can also lead to bears being in close proximity to humans. The next reason could be a surprise encounter, where the bear might feel threatened, and another common reason is when the bear wants to protect her cubs. The last reason could be because a bear had a bad experience with humans in the past. When you're cycling or walking in a bear-populated area, it helps to make regular sounds to make yourself known. Look out for signs like scratch marks or droppings. A bear's smell is very good and they are attracted to strong scents, so perfumated products is something you want to avoid. When we camp in bear areas, we make our food at least 100 meters away from our camp spot, downwind, and we hang our food in a tree in an odorless bag, away from the main trunk, as bears can climb trees very easily. It's also possible to use a bear canister. If you're in an area where the chances of an encounter are high, you can consider taking bear spray or even a portable electric fence for around your tent at night for some peace of mind. Different types of bears have different behavior. That means it's important to learn how you should act and react to different bear species. The next and perhaps even the most important animal we want to discuss are ticks. Ticks are external parasites, living and feeding on the blood of mammals, birds, and sometimes reptiles and amphibians. They need a host to be able to survive. Ticks act as vectors of many serious diseases that affect humans and other animals. We can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a dedicated checking routine in tick-infested areas. It's something we really hate doing but take very seriously, so we do a full body check of each other twice a day. If you're alone, you can use a mirror for body parts you can't easily access. The highest chance of a tick bite is in the warmer months, mainly in spring and summer, and especially in areas where there are a lot of mammals, big or small, that walk through the debris or sleep on the ground. Before choosing a campground, check if you don't position your tent on a nest. We've done that a few times and that is a real disaster. The nymphs are extremely small, sometimes almost not visible with the naked eye, and they too can carry disease. The way ticks transfer onto the body can be through the ground or when walking through high vegetation. Some people say that they drop themselves from trees, which I think is a hoax. We are not a fan of the product Date, but we heard it's the only product that really works. I also recently saw a funny tip of putting some sticky double-sided tape around the legs so they get caught on the tape, but I haven't tried it myself. There are some things you can do to minimize the risk, like wearing your socks over your pants when you move around in natural areas. A smooth fabric is harder for them to attach to, and if you wear light-colored clothing, it's much easier to spot them. As for a tick removing tool, we use the Enetter pad, and after having used many different ones, we found this one to be the most effective. When you spot a tick on your body, it's important to remove it as fast as possible, because the longer it bites into your body, the more chance it reaches your bloodstream, which increases the chance of the disease being transferred. Do make sure to remove the whole tick. Don't try to do it by hand unless you have no other option, because you can damage the tick and a part of it might still be stuck in your body. One of the most well-known diseases is Lyme disease. Some, but not always, indicated by a red circle that appears after a while on the location of the bite. Don't panic right away, because not every tick automatically carries a disease. When you do have a tick bite, make sure to write down the date, the time and the location on your body. If you feel any symptoms or if a red circle appears, go to a doctor or hospital. And the last one is mosquitoes. In some parts of the world, mosquitoes can also carry serious diseases like dengue, malaria, Zika and many others. There are medicines you can carry or take preventive shots against certain mosquito-borne diseases like Japanese encephalitis and yellow fever. We don't know the ins and outs of every type of disease and treatment. For that we advise you to do your own research and seek advice from an expert. And now we came to the last subject of this video, which is sickness and disease. There are a plethora of diseases to obtain, but in our experience you have to be unlucky to get one. The worst we personally experienced is food poisoning. We always do research up front of the most common diseases and try to inform ourselves on the actions we can take. This can include having health insurance, taking along medication and a medical kit, and perhaps preventive shots. My main advice is to filter your water, keep on track with healthy food and supplementation to keep your immune system strong. It's good to carry a medical kit and get familiar with the contents. Far too often people take a first aid kit just for the sake of it, but have no idea on how to use the different items in there. If you have any specific health problems, you can consider carrying a piece of paper or perhaps an Epic ID bracelet containing your medical info, so when something happens, people know about your situation. One extra tip is to get health insurance, so you're sure that whatever happens, you're able to pay for it. These were my tips on bicycle touring safety. I hope I was able to answer some of your questions and set a few worries aside. I have to say it was a really difficult video to make, as it's a serious subject, but also important and hopefully helpful. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and that I didn't scare you away from starting your own bicycle tour. It might feel like a lot of information, but I can't stress enough that most of the things I've mentioned are unlikely to ever happen. We've been on the road for several years, and yes, we did experience a few difficult situations, but that doesn't stop us from exploring this beautiful planet with its beautiful people. Bicycle touring has given us more than we could ever describe, and for us that's worth the bit of risk. With that said, I want to thank you for watching, and don't forget to share your personal thoughts, tips and tricks in the comments below. If you got something from it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to receive more tips and tricks and to follow our adventures around the world. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.